How much further do Tour Pros hit it than average club golfers? I've got Trackman data from PGA Tour Pros, LPGA Tour Pros and Shot Scope stats from the average club golfer, so you can see just how your distances stack up to the best players in the world. Okay, let's start with the big stick because everyone just wants to know more about driver distance, how far everyone hits their driver, and I guess get a bit of an ego check on how good they are with their driver. Now, if we start with a PGA Tour Pro, they average 282 yards in terms of carry distance. It's pretty impressive when you think that's probably going to run out over 300 most of the time. Now, they do this by generating on average 115 miles per hour of club head speed, which, yeah, I need to get moving if I'm going to get anywhere near that. Now, interestingly, they actually hit 1 degree down on driver, which is completely kind of different to what you'd see on the LPGA Tour, and it shows you how the male and female pros are generating speed in a completely different way, because the LPGA Tour players are actually hitting 3 up on it, but they have 96 mile an hour of club head speed, and that's typically giving them about 223 yards of carry. And again, if you think of that in terms of run out, it's going to get you to like 245, 250 total. Now for this video, in terms of the amateur, I want to compare that average club golfer. Now here in the UK, the average handicap is 18, so I've gone and got the Shot Scope data that reflects that handicap and how far they would hit the golf ball. Now if we're looking at the average male golfer here, this is total distance rather than carry, but they're getting 225 yards out of their driver. So you can kind of see why the Tour Pros are so far back, because they've got 60 yards on us just in terms of carry, so they've probably got 80 yards plus in terms of total distance there. Now when we look at the female amateurs in the same handicap category, they're looking at a total distance of 199 yards with driver. So again, if we look at kind of total difference comparison, they're probably about 50 yards behind the LPGA Tour gap. So there's a big gap there in terms of distance. Distance correlates very closely to handicap from what we see in the Shot Scope data. So if you're looking to improve, trying to kind of work on that swing speed and maybe increase your distance is a real key area you can look at, maybe with a coach, with a personal trainer, to try get those scores down, because ultimately the further you can get down the hole, you've got less club into the green, it's going to help with your accuracy as well. Now obviously these are averages, so there are players that go above and beyond this. So far this year on the PGA Tour, Cameron Champ is the longest off the tee, and he's averaging 318.3 yards, which means he's pipping Rory by 0.2 of a yard. That means they're nearly 100 yards past the average club golfer, which is absolutely mental to think about. You'd basically have to hit driver and another full 9-iron to get to Rory's drive from yours. Now again, on the LPGA Tour, there's also some girls who are really knocking it out there a long way. Austin Kim is leading the driving stats for this year, and she's averaging 277 yards, which is miles. I was like, I think I hit driver quite well, and I can swing at nearly 100 mile an hour, and I'm not getting anywhere near that. So maybe I need to get some speed sticks out and do some speed sessions. I'm saying that's LPGA Tour standard. Okay, 3-wood. I think this one is super interesting because if you pair your maximum 3-wood potential distance with your potential maximum driver distance, that basically gives you what total capacity you have to reach a par 4 or a par 5 in 2, which is essentially capping like how well you can score on those holes. If you can't reach par 5s in 2, it makes it more difficult to make birdies, and if you can't reach par 4s in 2, you're definitely like putting a lot of pressure on yourself to make par. Now again, if we look at the PGA Tour, on average they're carrying their 3-woods 249 yards. When we pair that with kind of that 282 total in terms of their driver distance, we can see that they can reach any hole that's about 530 yards in 2, which is a serious amount of distance, and you can see how that makes par 5s a lot more scoreable if you can easily get on in 2 on holes of that distance. Now if we compare like a standout distance player such as Rory, he can nearly hit his 3-wood 300 yards off the deck, totaling about 297 on average. That means when we pair that with his total driver distance, he has 615 yards of capacity to get driver and 3-wood down a hole and get on in 2. That means there's nearly no holes that Rory can't reach, and you just think of how much of an advantage that gives him on his peers, because he can basically get on every hole, but also the majority of the time he can get on with less club than everyone else needs. Now when we switch back to LPGA, they're carrying the 3-wood on average 200 yards. They're doing that from 92 mile an hour club head speed, and they're actually hitting a little bit more down on it now, so about 1 degree compared to about nearly 3 degrees that we see on the PGA Tour. Well, when we pair that with the driver distance, they're getting about 430 yards of carry distance. Obviously Obviously we'll see a little bit of extra run there, so that could get them up to maybe 450, 460 in terms of total distance. It's pretty interesting when we compare this to like the average club golfer, because actually the males aren't that far off this distance. Obviously their shot scope data is total distance, so it's taking in a little bit of run, but again their fairway wood comes out at 199 yards, so pretty close to that. Now this means if the average club golfer stood next to Rory and hit driver 3-wood, you would nearly be 200 yards behind him. He's got like 195 yards on you. That's pretty mental. I just can't really get around that stat. He'd literally like, we'd be here and he'd be like in those trees down there. He's only like 3 inches taller than me. How's he doing it? Now, if we move again into the female data for a club golfer, it's actually not that far off the men's data. It's definitely a lot longer than I would have expected. So 185 yards with the 3-wood. Obviously that does include the rollout, which we don't see compared to the LPGA numbers. So they're only 25 yards off LPGA, but that's a lot of it's indifferent in terms of the flight, the rollout, the total distance. But I suppose some of that does help you show why on some golf courses females maybe have more par 5s versus the men par 4s, because the carry distance is not the same, and also a lot of their distance is coming from run rather than total carry, so you can't necessarily get over certain bunkers. So it's definitely interesting to see the differences there in terms of distance, but we do have to think a little bit about how that distance is being generated, and typically we see that the male golfers have a little bit more peak height to their flight, so they're getting a little bit more carry, not quite as much run as what we see with the women. Okay, 7-iron. For some reason, there's also loads of ego attached to this club. It's kind of like the driver thing. It's like, how far do you hit 7-iron? How far do you hit 7-iron? Which I don't really understand, because as much as I'm showing you loads of distances here, a lot of this should just be about knowing your distances, because that's going to help you play better out on the golf course. Having said that, some of the stats here are mind-blowing. The average PGA Tour player carries their 7-iron 176 yards. For the average kind of 15 handicap male golfer, you would have to hit a 5-wood to reach their 7-iron. That's like a massive difference. If you think how inaccurate generally we are with fairway woods or 5-wood compared to like how much more accurate you can be with a 7-iron, especially a tour pro, like the difference in that is just staggering. Now it's quite interesting when we look at the rest of the data, because it's all quite similar from LPGA Pro through to like the average male and female golfer. We do have to factor in the fact that the average club golfer distances are total distances, not carry, so they do include a bit of run out, but the average male golfer is hitting their 7-iron at 146 yards, the average female golfer is hitting it at 141 yards, and the average LPGA Tour player is up at 143 yards. Now there's also going to be a factor there that typically a lot of tour pros are using blades, CBs, smaller golf clubs, so they're not necessarily using equipment at this point that's giving them a lot of extra distance, because they're really looking for that precision. So obviously a lot of club golfers are kind of getting a little bit more out of their clubs. And I know a lot of people will get angry in the comments. It comes up every time I talk about 7-iron and how far the distance is like, what is the loft of the club? Someone's just using a really strong lofted club to get the same distance as me. And yes, in some areas that is the truth, but actually the loft of a club is dictated by the flight that it generates. So when a designer is designing a 7-iron, they're looking for a set flight window that a 7-iron should fly through. That's how they define a 7-iron, the flight window of the golf ball. So if they put lots of technology in the sole, lots of weight at the bottom, tungsten in here as I have in that this T150, they have to bring the loft down, otherwise you would literally hit the golf ball up your nose. Like it would just go like a lob wedge up and down. So manufacturers aren't just grabbing a club, cranking the loft down and allowing you to hit it further. It's actually a result of all the tech they're putting in the sole. But it's also a reason you probably shouldn't just look in your mate's bag and be like, oh, he's hit a 7-iron, I'm going to hit a 7-iron here, because every club, every model, every type goes a different distance, and everyone hits their clubs different distances. So actually knowing your own distances is really important, especially when it comes to shorter irons going into greens, because it's really going to help you improve your scoring by getting up to the pin. We know most people leave the ball short of the green, so really learn your distances would be a key thing I'd like you to take away from this. Before we get to the rest of the yardages, I would really love it if you could hit that subscribe button. It makes a huge difference to the channel in terms of what content we create, and I would really appreciate it. And while you're there, you might as well hit that like button and drop us a comment. Maybe just do a little brag about how far you hit your driver. Okay, we're down into the scoring clubs at pitch and wedge. Obviously the further you can hit these, the more easily you can kind of attack the greens, because you're just going to be more accurate with like the shorter length shaft that you've got here and the loft on this club. Now in terms of PGA Tour Pro, they're carrying these still 142 yards, which is like the 7 iron of an LPGA Tour Pro. I can't really get that around my head. It's kind of madness. Although I think if you looked at the dispersion, the LPGA Tour players would be kicking those PGA Tour players' butts. Anyway, in terms of carry distance for the LPGA Tour players, they're carrying on average 111 yards for pitching wedge, which I was kind of surprised at, but I guess that does include like the shortest and the longest hitters. I hit my pitching wedge like 1, 2, 3, so I would have just expected it to maybe be a bit more than that. I probably don't hit it as straight as they do though. Now when we move into kind of the average distances for the club golfers, the males are averaging out at 108 yards with this club and the females at 101 yards. Now obviously again those are total distances, that's the P average that Shot Scope collects, it's their performance average, so that takes out kind of your bad shots, so it's just an average of the good middle data. It wouldn't include any shanks or chips out of the tree that you do with this club. So you can see, really, if you want to be making birdies and getting the ball close, you need to be hitting your drive to within 100 yards of the green, which really gives you some perspective on how far you need to hit driver if you want to be scoring really well. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. Obviously I've gone through kind of some key clubs in the bag there, but if you do want the data on every single club, I will put a graph up now so you can look at that a little bit more in detail. After reflecting on this data, it's pretty interesting. We could all do with hitting it a little bit further, couldn't we? And again, we could all just really do with knowing how far we actually hit our golf clubs, because I do think first and foremost that's going to help our scoring the most. Now, I also think on reflection, maybe I need to do some how to increase your club head speed videos. Let me know in the comments if you would be interested in that and if there's anything else you want to see on the channel.